This is ANTIC, the Atari 8-Bit Podcast. I'm Kay Savitz. Mike Lorenzen worked at Atari, Activision, and Accolade, creating games for the Atari 2600, Atari 8-Bit, and Commodore 64 computers. At Atari, Mike coded Golf and Circus Atari for the Atari 2600. For the 8-bit computers, he wrote MEDIT, which he told me stands for Mike's Editor. Atari got a lot of mileage from MEDIT, using versions of that editor in several products. First, an Atari Program-Text Editor, which was bundled with Atari Macro Assembler, and in two Atari Program Exchange products, APX 20075 Atari Program-Text Editor and APX 20076 Word Processing Diskette, where it was bundled with a text formatter. Both APX's Program-Text Editor and Word Processing Diskette first appeared in the winter 1981 APX catalog, the second APX catalog, with a price of $39.95 for the Program-Text Editor and $49.95 for the Word Processing Diskette. Relatively hefty prices considering the median price for software in that catalog was just $17.95. At Activision, Mike ported Pitfall and Pitfall II Lost Caverns to the Atari 8-bit, and in that created the undocumented Easter egg of an additional game inside, Pitfall III, which appears only in the Atari 8-bit version. At Accolade, Mike developed the game Psi-5 Trading Company for the C64, which he called the most sophisticated Commodore 64 program ever written. This interview took place on June 4th, 2026.
Education-wise, some of the highlights that led to this was in 73, as a freshman, I took a vocational class on being an electrician. It was theoretical, not with any physical labs. We didn't connect outlets, but we learned all the theory about it. In my senior years of high school, I took a vocational class that was sponsored by Linker Labs in Redwood City, a 1960s famous engineering facility. And there I learned all about electronics, the related physics, how to use a soldering iron, how to design both analog and digital thing. I had a working understanding of the entire 7400 digital chip set. The 7400 chips were like, everything from a basic NAND gate, an AND gate, an OR gate, and buffers and whatnot. So we designed simple things, simple circuits. We made our own PC boards. We made things like, I remember I made my parents a digital clock from 7400 parts. We made lots of, there was a thing where we had a little analog circuit that hooked up to the speaker of your stereo or radio or whatever, and then we flashed multicolor lights behind diffused plastic in a box that would flash and dance to the music. I did find out that I liked digital more than analog. Because, I don't know if it was just the fact that all our parts were donated from surplus and we got the least reliable parts. But if you build 10 circuits, I used to say 8 would work perfectly, 1 would be marginal, or 1 just refused to work the first time you built it. And I don't know if that was our parts sourcing or that fact. But the digital things we built, man, once they worked, they were consistent, right? It just worked. I like that. I got off in college. I took a computer class. I was on the target. Well, I was thinking about being an electrical engineer, but I found out in college you needed like lots of math and 2 years of foreign language, and I took a foreign language in high school and just did not enjoy it whatsoever. So computer science, on the other hand, and they were a lot less. They were more lenient in those two subjects, and so I attended San Jose State University. I took a intro to computer science, the first one San Jose State offered in '75, and that was an introduction to using Fortran. And at first, I was overwhelmed by it. I was not doing well. And to keep up, I found that other professors taught the exact same syllabus. Each day would be exactly the same. They used cookie cutter. And I took it from two other professors that were teaching the same class. So I interrupted the class and asked so many dumb questions in the first class, and then I went to the second class and I asked everything I didn't understand at that point, and by the time I got back to my class, I became an expert and ended up with an A in the class versus the original. Yeah, you're going to flunk out of this, dude. The second professor turned out to be the San Jose State Computer Center director. And they thought I was brilliant in the second class, and they offered me a job as a computer consultant to help any SJS student. It was 35,000 people. Any of them had a computer language issue, couldn't run the program, had a bug, that kind of thing. And I'd only taken one Fortran class, and this was everybody from newbies to grad school students who had been using programs for years, doing statistics and whatnot. But the trick was, and nobody taught me this, I just figured it out, is I didn't know what they were talking about, so I just had them explain to me line by line what they thought they were doing. Half the time, they would fix their own mistake. And the other half time, I would see the logic error, go look it up in a book. I could do that. Mm-hmm. And I became the most popular consultant. And I learned a lot because I would keep learning all these, they would bring me something in COBOL, and I had to fix COBOL. And they would bring me something in a statistical background, and I have to learn that. So I learned a lot of stuff doing that. And in the end, the computer center director got me a job at IBM in their corporate computer center for the summer. And there I hung a couple hundred mag tapes with 50 megabytes on a tape. That was IBM's global data center for the planet. IBM was the biggest computer manufacturer and the supplier of software, back in the early days. They didn't like me much there because to get to that level, you had to be at IBM for a lot of years, and I came in as an intern for a 10-week summer program. But we had a library of over 100,000 tapes, and I learned how to load them up. I also learned some tricks, like to learn they had a series of 5-digit tape numbers, so there'll be like 100,000. So it would ask for tape 75232, and you don't think of it as a 5-digit number. The trick is, if you think of it as a 2-digit and a 3-digit number, you can memorize many more pairs. And that was interesting. There, I also worked or visited and was fascinated by both the first big-time laser printer that IBM had, and it was famous for printing out an entire night's work in a couple of hours, or because it was still being developed, it would jam up so significantly that it would take them the rest of the shift to put it back together, and they'd fall back and use the old line printers. I also was there with a mass storage system, which was 4,000 soda can-sized reels of tape. I think it was 770 inches of tape on each one, 50 megabytes, plus maybe another, 10, I don't remember the number, 10 gigabytes of, if there's some defects in the first part of the tape, we have some extra tape at the end you can use to do it. And it was a little robot that, it had 2,000 of these soda cans on one wall, and it could turn around and get 2,000 from the other side. And this was said to, all the data in the Library of Congress all could fit on this MSS. So that was the first thing. So some electrician accidentally hit the power off button for the building, and it took them 4 days to get the center back online because some of these disk packs had never been spun down in their entire life. They were sitting there for 10 years spinning around, and anyway, they had issues. Part of the problem was the way the MSS worked was that it pulled these tapes into 2 disk packs, and then those disk packs were done to 6 more that were connected to the computer center. And the 2 primary packs failed in that event. Anyway, it was interesting. I know. The next year I couldn't get. They didn't have any budget at IBM, so it turns out my Boy Scout leader got me a job at Bank of America programming COBOL. He ran the department. He had 75 programmers working for him. Most of the time, they were tellers. The most brilliant tellers in the bank were sent to 2 years of JCL school, which was Job Control Language. And you had to, and that's just the thing back then was IBM punch cards, right? The JCL was hard, and if you couldn't grab how to request your resources and do this and that, your job would fail. So before they even learned a line of COBOL, they spent 2 years just on their job control language. I want to use compiler X. I want this much memory. You had to ask for everything explicitly. And after they did that, then they were sent to 2 years of COBOL school. Well, my experience was I'd never programmed COBOL. I'd never saw it before except for helping students. Luckily, back in the olden days, every language had a Bible, a book that had everything that you ever wanted to know about the language. And in the case of COBOL, it was a government standard, ANSI, COBOL, yada, yada, yada. And so I took that book and I sat there nearly without sleep for 3 days and practically memorized the book. And it turns out over the summer I was ranked like number 3 or 4 out of that department in terms of technical ability in COBOL. This actually caused a issue. They were a little grumpy about this new kid that came in that was embarrassing them. And they showed me in the computer, and we had the setup was that we used a IBM Silent 700, which was a typewriter-sized paper printer that printed on slimy paper like the early faxes, and it was paper. And then you talked to the IBM 370 somewhere, and of course they had separate IBM 370s for production than they did for testing. So anyway, we weren't supposed to play games. That was bad. But he showed me a game called Eliza, which was the psychiatrist program written in BASIC a billion years ago. Sure. And the running joke of that program was that, how are you feeling today? Yada, yada, yada. And if it came up and the guy encouraged me, type in why, ask it why I thought this. And so you type in WHY and character or was it question mark and submit that. And the joke was in BASIC, it was a infinite loop. It was like, line 400, go to 400. And what happened on my Silent 700 were dollar signs kept printing out. And it turns out a dollar sign was a feedback loop that every $80 of bank computer time you spent, it would print a dollar sign on there. And all of a sudden, it's printing out entire lines of dollar signs, and I'm hitting on the keyboard, Control C, Control C, Control C. So I had a month to figure out how I was going to explain this, because the guy says, you're out of here, dude, right? All your smartness is not going to help you. They're going to look at this huge bill, and you're out. Ha, 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 ha. Well, what I did is, this was in San Francisco on Van Ness Street. You had to walk to the train station and or take a bus. And all the buses, for whatever reason, in 70, this would be 76, that all the transportation shut down around 4:45. There wasn't a bus you could get at 5 o'clock. So I walked. So since I walked, it didn't matter when I went. So I stayed behind. Everybody left around 4:15 out of the lab, and it gave me free run of the lab, and nobody was looking. So back in the days, I said everything has a manual, and everything known in the universe about that was in a paper document. And of course, it was constantly changing. So there was literally all manuals were in 3-hole punched, and some poor schluck like me in the back at San Jose State as a consultant, I would get all the weekly updates, and I would take out individual pages. You couldn't reprint an entire manual, but you could update individual, page 297, page 591, so that it was always up to date. And I found a program that that was a data generator. And it turned out nobody in the department used it. So I used it my job at the bank in 10 weeks was to convert 20,000 loans from some earlier computer long before the 360s and the 370 that they've been using to do loans. It had 20,000 loans on it, and I was to put it onto the 370 in COBOL. And I was able to use this data generator, and I made 2 million records at a time through my program. And it turned out I got an award when I left. I turned my program in and left, and I found out later that I got an award from the bank for the first job at Bank of America that ever ran the first time in production. I was pretty proud of that.
Nice.
So my scout leader also got me into the Stanford Homebrew Computer Club, and that was a turning point. I think it was Lee Feldstein was the guy who led the meetings. On the side, he was involved with the developing the processor technology. Sol 20 computers was the most popular model. It was basically an 8080 based computer using the S100 bus. Before that, the competitors at the time were the IMSI, the Altair, I think there was a polymorphic 88, and the Sol. So there were like 4 computers. There was this guy named Waz who came in with a cardboard box with a thing he called Apple One in it, or Apple, his Apple computer, and we all jeered him as having, that he needed to go back and refine it, and that became Apple II, in my mind. So as it turns out, my dad died 3 days after high school. And the Southern Pacific, which he worked for 35 years, gave me a $20,000 college fund. And I spent $17,000 something of that on a 1976 processor technology Sol 20 computer kit.
Wow.
So it's an 8080 based computer. I had 48K of the brand new dynamic RAM. Dynamic RAM is the same as static RAM, but static RAM, once you put it in there, it stays there pretty much. And dynamic RAM, you have to have a circuit over on the side who sneaks in and refreshes it. Otherwise, it forgets.
Right.
But this was way cheaper than the static RAM. So anyway, I had 48K of RAM out of a 64K address space. I had, and of course, there were, that other address space was used by, the operating system, which I think was only 2K. And I had 2 North Star 5-inch floppies. That was the first time 5-inch floppies had made it to the microprocessor world. Almost everything was 8080 back then in the microprocessor world. There was a Kim board that was a one-board computer based on a 6502. That was one that wasn't an 8080. Anyway, so I spent all my life, free time, playing with my home computer. Interesting. I took it to the dorm room with me, and I couldn't get insurance for it because I was worried about losing $20,000. I mean, that was a lot of money. The only insurance I ever got back was from the Lloyd's of London for $300. They'd insure it for fire. So basically, I put it in my dorm room. I had a closet that you kept your wardrobe in, and as comical as it seemed, I put 10 locks on that door. And then as I used it, I would drag it out, put it on my desk, and when I left the room, I would put everything back in the vault, as it were. Later, I had an apartment and got a walk-in closet and put several deadbolts on it for the same reason, because you couldn't get insurance back then. And then when I had it in my dorm room, because I was the consultant and I was also the operator of the PDP 1145, and I befriended the hardware guy for the 1145, it had something like 32 ports for timeshare. So 32 people could share the PDP 1145, and the only other computer, the San Jose State in this era, 1976, had 3 computers. They had the Control Data Corporation, CDC 3150, which was a mainframe. It was actually a CDC 3300 that didn't meet quality control and they had to slow the clock down so the electronics ran slower, and then it worked fine. And that's what they sold to all 20 of the California State College systems. And it was in its I think it was in its 18th or 19th year of being serviced. Back then, technology didn't move that fast, right? Interesting. So I had figured out that with the help of the hardware guy, that I took a port off the PDP 1145. Suddenly they only had 31 working terminals, and I wired it into the phone wiring of the campus, and I ended up running RS-232 into my dorm room, into my computer. So I was the only person that could use the PDP 1145 24 hours a day, because if the labs was open, you couldn't get to a terminal. So that was an interesting one.
Nice. So how did you get hired by Atari?
Yeah, well, okay. Yeah, so there's 2 more things I want to do just to finish that first line of thought. The next summer, my next summer, I worked at the second largest Radio Shack out of 7,000 stores, and I became the West Coast expert on TRS-80. And people would fly in from all over the country to ask me technical questions. I transferred to Sacramento State, which had the best program on microprocessors, and it helped me, and they also had a local homebrew chapter there, and continue my both hardware and software. I was dual. Christmas 1978 gets to your answer. From a home computer point of view, color terminals were just coming out, but they were beyond my budget. There's just the RAM chips were $1,200 for one bank, and so it was $3,600 cost to add a red, green, and blue bank for the display. And on Christmas Eve, my wife's working at Farrell's to supplement our income. 2 can't live cheaply as one, we found out. And I saw an ad from Long's Drugstore blowing out $749 Atari 2600 video game systems for $499 until they closed, at 2 a.m. Well, it would be the 26th of the day after Christmas. They were open late for the last minute thing. And I thought, hey, maybe I could turn this into a color monitor for my Sol 20. So I bought it on a credit card. I opened the box. I didn't even play a game or turn it on. I just started taking it apart. I desoldered all the electronics off all the boards. Interestingly enough, Atari on the assembly line had somebody with a Dremel tool that had Dremel tooled all the ID off the big parts. All the chips were just blank. They were just, blank plastic. And so I made a schematic, and then I put the parts back on, and then I had a book written by Adam Osborne. He had a 3-volume set, and one of them had every known CPU and their support chipsets of every microprocessor in existence at the time. There were probably 16 or 17, 18 of them. I still have the book. It's on my headboard. And by following power, ground, data bus, and address, I quickly discovered it was a 6507, which is a flavor of a 6502. It's basically a 28-pin version and doesn't bring out the full 40 pins of the 6502. And over, from Christmas until San Jose State didn't start up to, or not San Jose, Sacramento State didn't start up until the last week in January. So I had 3 or 4 weeks to play with no agenda. So I took about $300, about 10% of my annual income, and I made an interface of dual-ported RAM that could be a cartridge in the 2600, but it lived in my 8080 processors of soul. So I think I was the only guy that ever used the Tri-State bus for that purpose. But there was a pin, there was a 100-pin connector, and one pin on there, they designed that not many people used it. You can Google later. This Tri-State pin allowed you to disconnect the CPU and add in a different CPU to share the peripherals. And so I used it so that in one mode, the RAM and the computer was the 6502 or the 6507 in the Atari video game, and the other mode I could use the 8080. And it turns out I wrote a cross assembler. So on the 8080 side, which I was very fluent in at that time, I wrote a assembler that could take source code and put it into 6502 opcodes and transfer it across to the 2600 hardware. And then I wrote a disassembler. So I started taking disassembler as a program that takes the hex opcodes and puts them back into an English language, assembly language looking format. And then I wrote a debugger, and then I started modifying the games, and then that's how I began reverse engineering. So I had actually made my own cartridge at some point. I made a tank game. Atari had a tank game, but it wasn't this. It wasn't glorious, but it was functional. And I decided to call Atari and get hey, this is a lot of fun. Let me get a manual for this thing. Everything had a manual back then. So I called the main number of Atari. And the receptionist, was at a company of 1,000-something people, and she didn't know what to do with that kind of a question. So she passed me to the head of software in the 2600. The guy's name was George Simcock. And I said, I need this manual. Oh, we don't have the manual. I said, well, I've already figured out how to do this and this, but I'm really curious. And he said, oh, that's very interesting. Yeah, can you meet with us? And so he picked a date, and I went to this meeting, and there were 5 people in the meeting. It was George and what I call the Fab Four at the moment, Dave Crane, Alan Miller, Bob Whitehead, and Larry Kaplan, which were the 4 most prolific software people at Atari, who had made 60% of all the games at that point.
Sure.
And by the way, also made the operating system for the Atari 800 between the 4 of them, with a couple of consultants to help out. And the first line of questioning was, where did you steal the manual from? Who did you sleep with to get the manual? Right? And like, whoa, no, I did this myself. And they're all there with their jaw dropped. And what came of that was, well, we're on a hiring freeze, but as soon as we do it, you're hired. And they sent me out with, a bunch of games and controllers, like the driving controller, which was a continuous spinning device that was used for driving games, and Yeah. So, and then it turned out they went quiet. Time was moving on. I was in my senior year. I needed, by June, I needed a job. So I started finding out where Atari was appearing in trade shows. And so I would crash into the trade show and I would hunt down, and who I found most of the time was Al Miller. And so finally, I got the offer. Now, it turns out the offer was for $12,000 a year, and I was making $20,000 at Radio Shack. So it was a 50% pay cut. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But this was a lot more fun, and it was in my interest. So I took, I could live pretty inexpensively, so I took the job.
Very nice. And you started off doing 2600 stuff, right?
Yeah. So first day, they said, we know what we want you to do. We want you to go to this surplus store where they have a console. It wasn't. I get them mixed up in recent years. I don't know if it was a Fairchild F8 or anything, but on some other podcasts we figured out which one it was. But basically, they said, go find this console, look at the golf game, and we want you to copy it exactly and put it on the Atari 2600. And the first thing I said is, isn't that illegal? You're stealing their work? He said, oh, no. The industry rules is that if it's on a different piece of hardware, you're not competing, so there's no harm, no foul. So I said, okay. And so I did do the game. It took me 6 months. I did 100-hour weeks. I was trying to impress them. So I work at 100-hour weeks. I put the original game in there, and then I expanded it. I added, I don't remember what I added, but it was something. I put in, sand traps, trees that would get in your way. I had a close-up of the green at the end. And a funny story is that I had a computer bug that when I mapped the ball from the fairway, you'd see the fairway view, and the ball would end up in the upper right corner of the green on the fairway view. And when I hit you and blew up to the close up of the fairway, the ball would be missing. And I just like, it was just when I had a problem with my edge cases, and what I did is I had a table, and I added an extra set of entries around it. It didn't fix it, and then I added 2 sets of entries around it, thinking, no, it'll never do this, and it did. That's all my bug. That cartridge had no bugs in it. I was very proud of that. It's very embarrassing when you go make 2 million things in ROM. At that time, it took 6 months of waiting to get your ROM manufactured, and it had a cost of like $4 or $5.
Sure.
It was a 2K cartridge. It was one of the last 2K cartridges in Atari. Interesting enough, the way you developed back then is that if you were going to make a 2K cartridge, you wouldn't worry about memory. You would just worry about making the game. And so for 4 months, you'd work on the game, and then maybe it's bloated. Maybe it was 3.5K, maybe 4K, maybe 5K, and then you'd sit there for the last 6 weeks trying to scrunch. It was insidious. You had to take perfectly working code and try to cut it and remove half of it and make it do the same thing. And that was an interesting puzzle, and I just thrived on that. So I was very good at scrunching. The second cartridge they gave me after I got that done was Atari Circus, and that's the one with a clown with a sewing pin in his hand,
And he's jumping up and hitting balloons.
Teeter-totter.
As he jumping off a trampoline or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Circus Atari.
Yeah. And it turns out that was I didn't start that game. Another engineer had been assigned that game, and after a year or something, he couldn't do it, and he was terminated. However, somebody in marketing had got a screenshot of it in the lab and put it in the catalog, and somebody took orders on it, and now it was a legal problem, and they hired the guy back, and he still couldn't do it. And when I came off golf, they said, "Oh, look, WizKid with the hardware and software, let him take a swing at it." And at this time, all the expertise, well, let's say, 60% of the expertise of Atari on the video game, the 2600, had left. That was Al, Bob, Larry, and Dave, who formed Activision. They left about 90 days after I got there. And thus, I was now a technical expert, as it were. So they asked me if I could look at the game, and so what we did is they had, back then we had a small PDB-11, and we had an 8-inch floppy that we kept in our software on and edited, and then we download it as RS-232 into our terminal, which had a port on the back for a printer, which was sent to the development system of the Atari 2600, and it, when you see hex on the screen, it was actually the development system knew that if it saw hex, that it would load it into the memory wherever the headers told it to go, and then you'd execute it, and you were able to debug it from that same glass terminal. So the software was kept on an 8-inch floppy disk. And so they said, well, since you're not an employee, we have to have you lock it in the top drawer of this file cabinet. And I had a key to the file cabinet, and every time he already had another job, so he was coming in on the evenings, and so every time he worked on it, and he put it in the file cabinet, then for the other 18 hours, I would take it out and work on it. And I remember him being surprised that, God, I was working on this problem. I had it for the whole time, and it just solved itself, and I don't even know what I did. I was sort of sad. And eventually I said, at the point where I said, I can finish this, they let the guy go, and then, I finished it. To me, it was sad because it was 3,200 bytes, so it was bigger than a 2K, but it hadn't ever been scrunched yet. So I could have made it fit in 2K, and I begged them for time. They said, no, we're being sued for this. We got to get it out. It's got to go out now. So it went out with, I think, 1,200 bytes of zeros. Couldn't even put my name in it, right, for fear of God. They would come after me. So it just sadly had 1,200 bytes of zero. I'm guilty. Here we are 40-something years later, I'm still guilty about it. So that cartridge also had no bugs in it, which I'm very proud of. And I had done that. After that, because the big four were gone, we went. Atari went to the two consumer electronic shows to show all their video games and whatnot. And so they invited me to go to the CES show and demo, my games, so Golf and the Circus. And then the four people that worked on there was actually a fifth that I'm quite aware of. Besides those four, Scott Scheinman wrote the RS-232 peripheral. He wrote some pretty good code and stood, the test of time. So I ended up also being the one that demonstrated the Atari 800 at the consumer electronic shows.
Oh, nice.
Later, they hooked me up with Steve Wright, who was actually a TV repairman on the assembly line, because the assembly line had hundreds of ordinary TVs that they would test their games as they built them. as they were being made, and he was an elegant speaker. He wasn't technical in the beginning. Later, I actually taught him how to program the 2600, and he made a game, Atari Soccer. Now, his great idea in soccer was it was a top-down view, and it was not a little stick man from the side, or it was straight down from the blimp, and all you saw was a rectangle with a foot moving forward, a square, and a foot moving backwards at the same time, a heel, and it would flop back and forth, and that was his graphics. And we shared an office because I was teaching him, but he smoked, and I do not like cigarette smoke, and I had bought him an ashtray that had a fan and a carbon filter, but he did not like it, and because it went through too many expensive cigarettes. So when he drew the line and said, "I'm not going to do that anymore," I pranked him. So he comes in to do the demo in front of marketing, and all the bigwigs are there. I had snuck into his code the night before and replaced his top-down graphics with little Running Men graphics. And when he fired it up, everybody applauded and said, "This is a great improvement! Oh my God, this is the best! This is genius!" And he was just red on fire, and he didn't know how it happened. And he said, "No, this is not what I want." And he had control of the project, and it went out I believe it went out with the top view graphics. But soon after I had to move out of that office, even though I started in the office first, I had to give it up because of I think probably because of that prank. And there weren't any offices left in Atari. I think I moved my desk into the janitor's closet because I didn't want to be in cigarette smoke. And so, there was actually a story about Ray Kazar doing an article for a big magazine, Time or something, I don't know what it was,
sure.
That had a quote that, Nolan Bushnell's, new games inside and out, but Ray, you ran a textile factory. What gives you the right, or the skill to work with the designers to get these games that are, and his quote was something on the order of, those guys are just another Tal designing prima donna.
Right. I think the quote was high-strung prima donnas. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, apparently I fit that mold. Somebody in CoinUp made a T-shirt, and later on I stuck it into Ray's office to greet him. We gave him a T-shirt too. But they said just another Tal designing, high-strung prima donna from Atari is what we used in the lab. My mom gave me some foolish advice at that time, and she said you should stop doing games and get in on the computer side of the business, the Atari 800. Get a real job. Not this messing about stuff. Now, by the way, my mom was a World War II Marine who ran the tabulators, which were the precursors to computers. They were programmed by wires and moving around, pegboard kind of a thing. She forfeited promotions to be able to continue dating my dad, a Marine supply sergeant. So, in my household, if they said take out the garbage, you had 60 seconds to get it done, or there were issues. So I went to the Atari side, and the first task they gave me there was we have the Atari disk drive, and everyone that engineering built is rock solid, and every single unit coming off the assembly line is marginal and problematic. And the hardware people and the assembly line engineers have thrown up their hands and said, we can't figure it out. And thinking that maybe it was a software issue, they invited somebody on software. And so I became, at that time, Atari was segregated. You had CoinUp, we were in a two-story engineering building. And downstairs was coin op. Half of upstairs was consumer hardware, and the other side was consumer software. And so the 2600 and the 800 were consumer software. We didn't even have access to go into the other facilities. However, because they made me an honorary hardware person, for I could talk to the hardware people about their disk drive, they had to program my badge to be able to go to both sides. In two different divisions. And it turns out they used a sledge card system, and it had so many tiers, and this was one more. They didn't have a tier above the division. So I ended up with a God badge. So I get, over the years, I could get into 45 different billions, 24 hours a day, into any place, because it was a God badge. So and that story comes in later. We talk about it. But it turns out I said, okay, I'm going to do this for you, but what I want is give me a room, give me 12 folding tables, give me 24 800s, give me 48 disk drives of both kinds. Don't tell me where they came from. Give me 12 power strips and 12. I didn't mean. I think it was the other way around. I think it was 12 800s and 24 disk drives. Sorry, I got a little carried away. And we had a dozen 40-column printers. And so I set them up in a room. I wrote some debug software that taxed them and rated them and produced statistics. And soon I had all of them figured out, within a week or two, that these are the bad ones and these are the good ones. And then they came and told me, yes, you're right. What I did initially was I looked at the ROMs first, and, all the checksums were exactly the same. So I did not use anything worthy of my skill. I simply compared them component by component visually, board by board inside the disk drive, and it turned out to be something foolish. It turns out that if this one particular IC was made by National Semiconductor, it was flawless. And if it was made by RCA, it was the issue. And then we found out if I switched them, the problem would jump to the other unit both ways. So I had solved the problem. It was something defective about that RCA chip. Now, to be fair, back in the old days, when you made a chip, you could license it to other people so they could get more volume, and it was supposed to be the same, sort of like generic drugs versus a brand drug, right?
Sure.
It's supposed to be the exact same thing. Now, it turns out RCA had found out that they had an issue, and they had put a footnote in their data sheet. But because the engineering department they never looked at the RCA sheet because they built it with National, and they were assumed to be the same. And it turned out that the assembly line people had their own purchasing department, and so they, we're building for the masses or buying for the masses. We want the cheapest price, and these RCA ones are cheaper today. So that's why we bought those. So anyway, in the same at the time, I asked for an intern from San Jose State, to come for the summer, and I had him take apart the software of the drive, because it turns out the engineer, I think it was Ray Masia, but I can't be sure of that. He did the hardware for the drive, but he also did the software. And his experience with 6502 software was he had a KIM board. And so he interfaced the KIM board to the hard drive, and he did it. But he wasn't a computer scientist kind of a guy. He did use an assembler, a program takes English mnemonics and puts it into hex code. He just figured out the hex codes. And an assembler, a good one, will give you a memory map and the use of everything, and doing it manually, putting in hex bytes of ones and zeros. He lost track of the thing. And it turns out my intern, I showed him how to. I made him a reverse or a disassembler and gave him an assembler, and I had him disassemble the code and put it in there, and then go back and comment on what it did. And he turned out we hired him full time, and he ran the disk drive, the Atari DOS and disk drive software from that standpoint going forward. I had also one day I was staring at the operating system code, and I was looking at some buffering, and there was a 16-bit arithmetic section. It was doing 16-bit math, and the way you're supposed to do on an 8-bit computer is you take the low byte, you add it, which produces a carry. First of all, you clear the carry, you load up value 1, you add value 2, it generates a carry, it's set in the register, whether it overflowed or not, and then you load up the second byte, and then you add it, you add up the new value, right, low and high. But
sure.
There was a clear carry between the low and the high. And that caused the Atari 800 disk drive to fall asleep for like 4 seconds. I thought it was 7, but I'm thinking about it, and it's probably 256 frames, which a frame is a 60th of a second, and a byte has 255 values, so it's probably 250 60th of a second, which has to be like 4.5 minutes, or 4.5 seconds, right? So the Atari would go beep 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 beep. It would just take these 4-second gaps. Anyway, so we fixed that. That was a bonus.
Nice.
So let's see. The next thing I was asked to do, I think I was on a lot of committees and whatnot, and hiring and whatnot. But I did work on a text editor, and it was a newly formed applications group. Hey, now that we have a computer, we ought to write some programs for it. At that time, Atari was secretive about their Atari 800 computer. The original idea was that the Atari computer was actually the next video game, the sequel.
Right, and they wanted to create the software and sell it, and that's how you make the money. And that turned out to be a very bad plan, but they changed their mind on that later. Right. So let's talk about that text editor. I have a question about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was twofold. It started out as let's make a word processor. And the way that they brought a guy named Dale Yoakum. We hired him,
sure.
and he quickly went from doing software to suggesting to others what software to do. So he sort of be the manager, right, or what pick the product kind of a guy. Why don't we try this? Why don't we try that? And he had seen a text editor go through a program that used certain characters to say, if you put an escape character P in there or a caret P, it would do a paragraph, or that kind of thing. And so what I did is I created a full screen editor that would take in those codes and immediately render it in the next 60th of a second. So it was real-time word processing using these embedded characters.
So there was a program called the Atari Word Processor, which I think I sent you a screenshot of. Was this your program?
Yeah. I don't know.
Okay.
I looked at it, and basically the image was basically just the blue Atari screen.
Right. Well, you can. There's multiple pages. You can turn the page to see a bunch of screens on that.
I can look at that later.
Okay.
And get back to you on that.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't know. And then later they needed a editor for the macro assembler. Which was the big boy assembler that could, to write any software on the Atari 800 from the Atari 800 versus, we were cross-assembling before that.
Right.
They had a MIDI a mini assembly line cartridge, but this was like a big boy one. But they didn't have an editor for it. So we took that in, and the thing I added was column editing, so that, in assembly language, typically you have your in the first few columns you have a label that says where you are or what routine it was, and then you had some code, and then you had some op codes, right? Variations of that, and then off to the side you had comments. And sometimes, you needed to rearrange those columns, so we put in column editing so that I could move all the comments to the right to leave room for longer op codes. Or if I had data statements with a lot of values, I could move them around. And it turns out they were in a rush to get that out there, and they didn't let me finish it. And there was a known bug that happened and I could detect the bug, but I couldn't. I hadn't figured out where it was yet. So they said, nope, you got to ship it. So it went out with a bug, and I feel very guilty about that 40 years later. But it caused, I made it an error. It said, editor is confused, and in the manual I gave some kind of recovery keystrokes.
So this was, I believe, the Atari Program-Text Editor. I think that's what it was called. They seemed like they reused it in a lot of different things. The MEDIT was part of various packages released by APS. It was part of the macro assembler. It seems like they got a lot of mileage out of it.
Yeah, well, perhaps. Yeah, I can't swear to it unless I looked at it. And to be honest, it's been 40 years. I'm not sure I'd recognize it. Probably would.
A few years ago, we recovered, someone in the community recovered the source code, your source code to MEDIT. For the 8-bit. So that's also out there.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? Well, God, that embarrassed me, because that MEDIT was done as a quick and dirty. In fact, I didn't code specific things. I got into the macro assembler and made macros. So with a bunch of arguments, and that would do like a block copy up or a block copy down. There were different rules, but they were 99% the same. So I would just do it as a macro and make, I'm not as proud of that code. Right. At some point in-house, we realized that the Atari 800 was going to require outside submissions. We couldn't write all the software fast enough to sell this against the Apple II. By the way, the Apple II sold for $4,000, and ours was $999. I have always been on the other side of Apple. Back at the homebrew, I went to Processor Technology Seoul, a company we all know today. Ha ha ha! It turned out Apple won, and then Atari Apple won the Atari Apple war with Apple II. Became much more. Became the standard. And then, today I'm on Android. I don't use an iPhone. I refuse, just for that reason. Anyway, and then I always thought it was bold of Apple to sue. Somebody copied the mouse and the GUI. Maybe it was IBM. Using the mouse and the GUI, and said, that's ours. But if you think about the entire story, they got it from visiting Xerox PARC.
Right.
Yeah. So they were off suing people for stuff they'd already stole. What the hell, right? Anyway, so I live in Cupertino. I live in Saratoga, which is the next town bordering Cupertino, and every one of my neighbors works for Apple, and I'm just I just have to keep my mouth shut and bite my lip. But anyway.
Okay, so you released this word processor, this text editor, and it had some bugs in it, and not your fault.
Well, it had one, let's be specific here. It had one bug. I could detect it, and I could solve it, but I couldn't do it. I didn't have the time before I shipped it to do it. Yeah. So, it was like, if you see this, do this, that. Everything was peachy. The Atari the Atari Program Exchange. Again, we were at that time. The Atari manual was secret and proprietary, and so Chris Crawford which is probably a name most people know in the Atari 800 lore. He started as a 2600 programmer. I may have been one of his mentors, I'm sure at times, because the big four had left. And he wrote a game that was something about a banshee, and marketing said, "Whoa, this is too far out there. We're not going to do anything with it." It may have made it to Sears. Sears, anything we couldn't that wasn't super duper good and wanted to have Atari's name on it, they would sell to Sears as an exclusive. So it had some of the the second best software. So it may have made it to there. I don't know. Later on, he made a program. He made a reactor simulation. And Atari, on the computer side for the Atari 800, they sort of rejected it as that's not mainstream. Nobody wants it.
Yeah.
And then pause on that thought. So the solution is Chris Crawford took over the teaching of the Atari ecosystem to the world. That was his task. Dale Yoakum took over the how to get outside programs to be visible in marketing and whatnot, and Atari made their own division called the Atari Program Exchange, or APX. We just called it Apex. And basically, it pays royalties to outside contributors. And technically, if you were an Atari employee and made something, you weren't supposed to get a royalty or in it, but you did get you might have got a name mention. I don't think I even got my name mentioned. So if that was my editor, there were no names on that. So that's a vote could have been mine. Chris Crawford had a unique trick. He came when he joined Atari. He gave them a list of 200 titles that he was already working on, because when you work for Atari, you weren't allowed to sell things on the outside or make money from. They owned you. So he gave them a list of 200 titles that he did. One of them was called the Eastern Front. That sound familiar? And his reactor program and whatnot. So I believe he actually got paid for his work, even though some of it was done on company time. He was clever. It turns out the Apex was a shoestring budget, and so it just started out with Dale, and then he used the duplication was on using an Atari 800 and a couple of Atari 810 disk drives. He actually, I was working a lot of 100-hour weeks, and I like knowing a lot about a little bit about everything. So I'm easily distracted. I think the current buzzword my son uses is I'm easily nerd swiped. Is that the word? I'm easily distractible.
Oh, okay.
So, so my wife, I work out what's she going to do? She's hanging around Atari a lot. So Dale knows her. He hires her to into Apex early on as the office manager and the duplicator and the person doing the work versus the marketing solution. And he knows by hiring her that he can now ask me, well, your wife could get more hours if you wrote us a disk duplicator. So I ended up writing the disk duplicator, and I think I had to modify the Atari OS and the disk drive chip. Basically we take the ROM out, put an EEPROM in, and basically all it did was allow more devices. So you could hook up, 24 disk drives to one Atari.
Oh wow! So a lot of places used dedicated disk duplicating machines. So you just use an Atari computer and a bunch of off-the-shelf disk drives and some special firmware to do it. Interesting.
Yep. The only thing the firmware did was allow more devices to be out, because what you wanted to do is you wanted to walk in, load 24 floppies, and then just walk away until it was completely done. right? So it would be a lot more expensive if you could only put four disk drives on 1-800. Then you'd have to walk to 6 different computers and start them. And
sure. Would it write to? So would all the whatever, say all the dozen drives be writing simultaneously?
I don't remember.
Okay.
Probably not. I don't know. I don't remember at all. Seems like a lofty goal. But the thing is, they didn't have I remember them bringing one in on trial, but it was like, way out of our price, $60,000 or something, right? Whoa, over budget. So as far as I know, they made them on those drives. I asked my wife, and she doesn't remember 40-something years ago what even doing it. I have to ask my sister-in-law. My wife got to hire my sister-in-law who ran the swing shift or graveyard. So maybe I'll have to hunt her down. But yeah. So we used to take the we had the backup in case Atari burned down. We would have a box of all the discs for Apex. There's still a couple of sets I've seen 10 years ago. I know you asked me to look for them, and it's on my list, but I have to get one of my kids to help me because I'm a pack rat to the scale of a hoarder, and I have to move a wall to get there. But I still have hope. I did take a couple of photos of my Atari 800 development system that I made at Activision.
Oh, nice.
I have both the prototype and wire wrap back and front, and I took photos of the PC board version that we used to make games for the 800. And I think I also found my original Atari 2600 development system that hooked up to my S100 bus. I think I found the box. I haven't looked inside yet, but I hope to send you some photos. You can tag them to this interview.
Thank you.
I know it was at the. I remember on the side, but my brother was in a bowling league, and he became the league secretary. So he was doing his stats for 150 bowlers or something, and so we wrote an Atari program to manage the league, and it would do all the stats and print out the sheets and whatnot. And I would take them in on Graveyard. Graveyard was an interesting time because I worked a lot of hours. And one reason for working a lot of hours is that every time I stopped, I forgot everything. That's how my memory worked. Mondays were horrible in terms of I used to work. There was a period of time I worked 4, 5, 20-hour days and took off the weekend for long periods of time. I became friends with the Activision facilities guy. We went gold mining and whatnot, because that was camping, boating, gold mining, swimming. It was a fun weekend. But come on Monday morning, I forgot everything. Right? I couldn't remember the syntax of the language. I would have to look at a sheet and bring myself up to speed.
Brad Freger said in an interview some years ago that your overwork almost killed you. He said you brought a sleeping bag into the offices and never left the office. At one point, you got very sick, and he called an ambulance. You were dehydrated, and you just had worked yourself into a state where you ended up in the hospital.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't remember that, but maybe. It's not vivid, but I do remember when I was doing, let's see, Dave Crane, Dave, Bob, Larry, Steve Cartwright, and Tim Schotter. The 6 of us were in an office in Cupertino, a satellite office. It was decided early on at Activision that there was too many people distracting us. We were too accessible, and marketing come over and ask us questions, or manufacturing come over and ask us questions, yada, yada, yada. So they put us in a satellite office, and eventually I think they opened up, I know the plans was to open up 20 of them. I personally design those offices. Remember, I took vocational electrician, so I wrote up all the blueprints for the buildings. I specified all the power, the electrical. I spec'd out I became the mother of the PDP-11s. I spec'd out all the PDP-11s for the remote offices. And when the office opened, I flew out there, loaded the software on the PDP-11s, and then taught the 5 guys that were there, like Gary Kitchen. I went to Boston with Gary Kitchen and his little gang of 5, and showed them how to use all our tools in like a week. And I did that multiple times. I got in trouble for that later. Ha ha ha. At the time at Activision, should I tell you how I got to Activision?
Sure. Yeah. Tell me how you left Atari. Yeah. I know that you got upset. Someone got upset at you at Atari, and you ended up leaving. So let's hear that story.
Yeah. So I was young, right? I'm only in my very early 20s, which turns out to be a problem with life experience. When you make a game, as games got more complex, I didn't have the life experience to back it up. I was a young guy, but so like for baseball, what went into baseball was what I learned in the 3rd grade about baseball. Not like I followed the sport as a fan for
right.
For decades and knew every stat. Right, so it was always a bit of a burden. My son accuses me that I was in love with the technology, not the gaming world. The thrill for me was a puzzle. The 2600, we had to count cycles. You had to know what everything in your program did. You had to make the code perfect. You could try to optimize it. That was a puzzle to me, and that was just joy. But the game itself was, secondary. And to be honest, I lost interest in games when we went from, the input being simple. And by simple, I mean a joystick and a fire button. When Nintendo came out with multiple buttons on their thing, and they started programming sequences, hit this, that, before it does this, that was too complex for me. I had now sort of lost interest in games at that point. But anyway, back to the ranch, how I left Atari. So near the end, I was doing a marketing, whatever project I'd finished, I came up and it at that time, manufacturing on floppy disks, just took weeks versus the 6 months of ROMs. Although they may have been making a ROM for this one, I don't know. They wanted something for women to want an Atari computer in the home for. And so, the classic cliche was, well, we need to let them do recipes on the computer. And so they asked me to do a quick and dirty card file program. There wasn't much time left. And at that point, all software was done by one person, except for the operating system. The Atari 800 was done by 4. But for the most part, it was one-person projects. And so I got a new hire to help me. He would do the testing and the graphics, and I would do all the code. And I was working on this in one week or one day at about 4 a.m. when we were both dead tired. He said, I don't see how you do it. It's so hard to buy a house with a starting salary of just $100,000. And sharing a salary was a termination event. The fact that, I had probably hired close to 100 people. And, I was a computer scientist, right? And I took one of the best programs on microprocessor. I'll stack it up to any college. Thank you. And with my experience in homebrew and having my own computer early on, I found that most people, basically, if you could say 6502 or name an opcode, you were hired. So I didn't have respect for all the new hires, and they refused to use the tools. Oh my God, it killed me, right? So we had a $20,000 HP analyzer that worked on a 6502, and you could set a condition, and it would give you the 64 computer cycles before it, and show it to you in single space, and could freeze on that moment and let you, these people, I don't want to learn that. I don't know how to do that. It's too complicated. I'll just look at the screen. If it doesn't do what I want, I'll make some code changes. Right? That just seemed like rinky-dink to me. But anyway, with that information, I had just fought for 3 months to get a raise from 24K to 27K. So I had some skills, and I broke into the office of the VP or whatever, and I went in there, and I was at his desk with the lights on. When he unlocked his office, well, how'd you get in here? Doesn't matter. We need to talk. He says, well, trade shares. So I traded shares. And then he said, what's your problem? And I said, I just found out what you're paying the new hires. And we just argued about this 3K bump for 3 months. And he's in a house, and I'm in a mobile home struggling. And so he picks up a pile of Post-it notes on a stack, and he writes something on it, passes to me upside down. I turn it over, and it says 250K. And my response was, I quit. So he broke my Atari loyalty. He said, oh, let me make the number bigger. I said, I don't care. No need. So it was I think it was on a Friday, because we'd all packed to move the entire Atari 800 group to a new building. And so everything was packed up in the boxes. And oddly, I went back to my desk and cleared out all my personal possessions out of my boxes. And on Monday morning, everybody said, what happened to Mike? Where'd he go?
Do you think there's a number that would have satisfied you at that point, or were you just too angry about it?
I don't know. I probably would have maybe, but I think at that point, with my loyalty broken, I had to explore my options. I had talked to Activision and iMagic before, and then I immediately knocked on their door to see if they were still in the mood. They were, and then Atari called back from the consumer side on the Atari, the video game side. And here's Atari, who had made $2 billion in sales of video game 2600 cartridges, and everybody who made those effectively had left or wasn't in games anymore. And for projects in the main catalog, I had 2 cartridges in the main catalog, and I'm not sure there were many people left that even had one in the main. There were some people that had them in the Sears exclusive, but I don't know. I don't know specifically, but that was my mind. That's my memory of it. Is that so? They asked me back, and they said, "We're willing." This is the first time they came up with the idea that we're willing to give you a percentage, right? I'll give you a hint. Through a lawsuit, somebody told me that Atari Circus sold 2.7 million copies, and they were probably making, it was a $5 part. They were selling it for like $45. It probably had $35 profit, whatever it was. It was selling for $75-ish. The Atari made a boatload of money. I worked 7 months on that for over 100 hours a week, and I was paid $7,000, $1,000 a month at that time. And didn't share. I found out also the sales guy got 3% of that just for taking the orders. And from my point of view, right, I don't know his job, but in my head, what I see is a guy picking up the phone. Hi, this is Toys R Us. We'd like to order 2 million. I'm sorry, you're on allocation. You can only have 750,000. Okay. Oh, and then this is Sears. We want to order 2 million. I'm sorry, I can only give you 500,000. And in 20 minutes. He was sold out. but he got 3% for what did he do to make the damn game? Anyway, not that I'm bitter 40 years later, just saying. And that's the reason why almost everybody in Atari left. They had no respect for us folks that, were doing our job. A lot of people didn't have to spend, people were smarter than I was. They'd whip out a game in a 40-hour week or a 60-hour week. So I go to this meeting at Atari, and they call me back and said, well, I know the computer people have treated you wrong. Let us do a thing. We're going to give a royalty. Well, how much is the royalty? Well, if you do a new cartridge that's never based on a game we've never seen on the planet, we'll give you a dime. I said, well, that's not very much. What about a translation? I think they came up with the idea. We have this translation. We have the license to a thing called Pac-Man. And so they offered me a penny a unit for Pac-Man. And I said, nah, not for a penny. And so I left Atari, and the poor guy that did that cartridge, it wasn't a stellar game.
Todd Fry knocked it out.
Yep. Todd was a carpenter. He was a young kid. He may have been younger than I was. And he had taught himself 6502 on the side. Not a computer science student of any kind, whatever. And his implementation, the hardest part of a 2600 caller is making the kernel the display. You have to count every cycle. You have to optimize it for the exact task you're doing, and typically you needed several, in horizontal bands.
Racing the beam the whole time. Yeah.
Exactly, and it didn't turn out well. So I believe that there are probably millions of surplus Pac-Man carts that joined E.T. and a few others that you all know the story about them being buried in the desert, and there was that old wives' tale. I knew about it from the beginning. I don't remember. I used to know where it was, and I know they had to go back and pour concrete on top of it because somebody figured out where it was and was digging them up and returning them.
Right. They did a documentary about it a few years ago about the dump in Alamogordo, New Mexico. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was like, we always thought they just did ask me. I would have told them it was true. But anyway. So I went to Activision offered me money, or not, iMagic offered me money, and I went to Activision, and the president there gave me an offer, and he says, well, it's going to be very low. Right? We're only going to start you at $125K, but listen to the plan. It's called the 5-year FU plan. And so the first year, you save money. The second year, I should mention that let's go with the plan. The second year, you buy a house. The third year, you put furniture in the house. The fourth year, you save money. The fifth year, you buy like a McDonald's franchise and retire, and you say FU to the company, to Activision. That was the point. We want 5 years of your life, right? Total commitment for 5 years, and then you're out of here. By the way, it was a great plan, but it only worked 2.1 years. And then the other part of my contracts, was that whatever my base pay was, my bonus had to exceed it each year, and that my salary had to double every year. So that was in my contract. I was also like that mean, remember we're a bunch of Cal designing prima donnas, high-strung prima donnas?
Yeah.
Just like that guy in the rock and roll who said, I don't want any brown M&Ms, but I need M&Ms in my dressing room every time. Because my brother was doing the bowling program, and I was sneaking in the middle of the night to use the copiers, and took some flack over that at Atari. I had it written in my contract that I had unlimited use of any copier in the building, and I had unlimited access and supplies without ever asking about any stationary supplies or whatever. So I had a couple of, and the other one was I didn't have to show my stinking badge. So at Atari, when Atari moved the Atari 800 group out to a place on Plumeria, they hired kitty cops. Before we just used a sledge cart, but they decided that it was important enough they put a live person there, and they wanted to see your badge and your driver's license every day you walked in. Well, you go lunch, you go in twice a day. I at this point, I'm a 300-pound sounding guy. I am not hard to recognize, and it's the same guy. So the same guy asking me to do this, and so being a high-strung PAL designing prima donna, I said I won't. You show me yours, and then I'll show you mine. So I made him get out his badge. I made him get out his thing, his driver's license, and we did that for a few weeks. And then I just said, screw it. I still have my badge that's gone. I can walk into anything. So I would go in. I went into our building, and he could follow me through the first door. But as soon as I started getting into deeper into the thing, his badge wouldn't do it. So they called security, and a supervisor come over, had a higher level badge, and he'd get in. The head of security came in, and I would just go in the lab so deep they couldn't get to. And one day I was there for 4 days, and my buddies just brought me food until the people, the security guard supervisors got tired of waiting for me. But I had in my contract, I don't have to show no stinking badge to anybody. But anyway, prima donna. Sorry.
Nice.
My God badge helped me at Atari. When Atari was making money, but they also didn't want to spend any. We only had 4 Atari 800s for 32 people writing software on it. I mean, that's crazy. You had to schedule time to sit down. You got 2 hours at this time, or you get more time in the middle of the night. Another reason for working in the middle of the night. I should have one thing about at the time I talked about this. I forgot. We were cross assembling from a PDP-11 into 6502 code. Yeah. That task for 2K cartridge like 25 minutes, and of course you do that 20 times a day. It seemed like so. While I was waiting for the computer to do its thing, right? If I was an altruist and perfect and not flawed, I'd be writing the next section. But I like to see the results of what I just did before what I was going to do next. So I would wander around and put my nose in things. But I had this God badge, so it let me into anywhere. And they gave the Atari VPs a fully blown out Atari 800 system with all the peripherals and stuff. And this just pissed me off because here we are, 32 guys, time sharing 4 machines. And I had a God badge. So there was a theft ring somewhere in Atari that these computers in all the VP offices started disappearing. And of course, it was a sledge card system. It wasn't. It had no central administration like you would today. It was basically every door access was a printer line on a piece of paper in the telephone closet of that building, and nobody bothered to look at them or hunt through all the door accesses. So I stole all these. I didn't steal. I liberated a bunch of Atari 800 systems, and everybody in the lab had access to a computer. And as things broke, you couldn't get it replaced. I would later on we had hit saturation, and so I would trade a broken BASIC cartridge or a broken RAM card or a broken joystick with a VP's joystick, and the VPs were starting to get the feeling that we don't make very reliable stuff. It turns out, no. It's just that engineering didn't have a budget to give me a new one. I remember a meeting where somebody came in and threw down 36 serial bus connected to the Atari 800. God damn it! I'm so tired of losing. Because along with that, I would steal it out of our own management's offices with my God badge. And said, God damn it, I want this stuff to stop. Here are 36 cables. The next month, well, that didn't work. Here's 36 more. And the next month, 36 more. And the fourth month, hey, look at that. Nobody lost a serial cable. So that showed you the demand for the thing. The other thing that was the most coveted thing besides the serial bus cable was a power strip. The Atari, every peripheral needed its own plug. And of course, a quality power strip was 4 feet long, had 12 or 24 outlets on it, and $75, $150, and took 6 months once you got permission. And my buddy Dale Yoakum, by the way, when I was a kid and I watched, World War II movies, my favorite job in the military was the scrounger. If you remember, was it Operation Petticoat, the Pink Submarine movie, where Tony Curtis is the scrounger and he gets stuff that you can't. Like, they couldn't even get toilet paper, for God's sake.
No, I haven't seen that one yet.
Movie. No. Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, it shows you my mindset about liberation. Right. I'm a straight shooter. I never took anything for myself. I didn't have a computer at home. Right. Until they issued them. But I did. I had my own little social justice system in my head. Another one. The Atari had a store where employees could buy refurbished units for $75 when they were selling for $250 new or something in the stores, and you were allowed 5 a week. And I bought 5 every week. I worked there, and I was a fat kid. I was a loner. I have very few friends, but somehow for 2.5 years, I always had somebody who knew somebody who wanted to get an Atari 2600 for $75. And then my wife started working there, and we were pulling out 10 units a week. And then I also, because of social justice, sometimes they did not do a quality work on the refurb because they knew it was going to employees, right? So my social justice system said that if anybody had a bad, what would typically break is joysticks were number 1, console switches were number 2, and occasionally a chip would go out. Like the PIA chip or something in there, and so I would take all the bad components and I would put them into one unit, and I would return it the next week. At the weekly store purchase, and I just got to imagine the look on the face of the technician that says, "Damn, both joysticks were bad. 6 of these console switches were bad. Oh my God, the chips are bad. Yeah, what are we producing here?"
You made like the statistically worst possible VCS.
Yes, yeah. So I'm sure it caused a bunch of looks. It never got caught. Maybe they looked the other way. Because I had a God badge, I befriended, and I knew enough about hardware to be dangerous. So I would pal around with the hardware guys too. And they gave me access. I wanted to know everything in their lab. And so I found out they had file cabinets of things called first articles. So the very first PC board that was sent out to be in mass production, they kept that forever. And they would keep like the first 10 boards. There were samples. Is this good enough? And maybe they'd rev it, right? So it turns out I talked them into letting me take one of these first articles for the Atari 800 and the Atari 800 disk drive. And also the plastic, right? The plastic, they have first articles. So instead of being a normal cream-colored Atari, they had the original samples, which were done in black. So they let me take the original prototype for the 800. It was black plastic. I built up a board from the original first article thing. I soldered on all the parts out of the parts bins, and an Atari 800 disk drive. And my nephew still has that computer. I gave it to him for his birthday when he was like 10 or 12.
Oh wow, the black one.
The black one. He still has it.
Beautiful.
And it was like the Johnny Cash song with a 1956, 57, 58 catalog, right? He had one that was, I soldered on every part.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, that thing's worth something to a collector. So So your nephews. Yep.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Whatever. Some of the other funny stories. Since I went to the Consumer Electronics Show, we got used to the limo when Ray Kazar wasn't using it. And one day we had a conversation about marketing uses these Sony Trinitron TVs, the best TVs on a glass tube in existence at the time, and probably still to this day. And they only use them for 8 days out of the year. They 2 4-day sessions, and then they put them in storage. We are playing on the world's cheapest television sets, a Samsung TV. And why we had Samsung, turns out it was the brother-in-law of the VP of hardware who said he could get a deal. And so Atari went to the low bid, and these 2 of them caught fire in the lab. That's how bad a TV they were. And so we say, would it be great if we could just keep those for 50 weeks out of the year? We could see the graphics so much better and cleaner, and see what our customer might be seeing. And so after the show was over, they all ended up in our lab. And I go and talk to the other guys. Did you say anything? No. So there were only 3 people in the car, so it had to be the limo driver. So we borrowed the limo again, and we staged some other conversations, and they came true too. So it used to become a running. If you need something and you want to bypass all management, we would borrow the limo and have a conversation, and somehow it magically came true. The rumor was, after we found this out, was that the limo driver and Ray were buddies, or more than buddies, shall we say. They were probably lovers, is what the thought was. And over pillow talk, things got done, is what our guess was, is what was happening. But we took advantage of it. The CES show, Atari would take like 300 video games and have 150 2600 set up, and we'd take dozens of computers, and they brought in 3 dozen carts of everything we sold, so that if one malfunctioned or if one was stolen, or they would give them, they would talk to people. Hey, Mr. Sears, you want to take one of these home, right? So they brought in a massive amount of inventory, and they made the engineers set up everything and maintain everything. And this is, 3 or 4 guys trying to maintain 200 systems in a trade show, and trying to keep up with the thefts and whatever. And their heart wasn't in it. It was long hours, right? That wasn't their job. And so they made a deal. They gave this guy every year in the beginning who ran the show and marketing changed, and then one guy did it so much better that this was the guy, and he had some conditions. If I'm going to do it, I want full support of engineering, and how I'll get that is all the inventory that goes to the CES show never comes back. You write it off the moment it goes, and I guarantee you that the hardware people will give you 150% and everything, and it did. It came true. And at the end of the show, anything that was left, they traded for like big screen TVs. They walk around to the different booths. Hey, you don't have to pack up that TV. Let us unload it for you, right? And so it did extend to the software people, sadly. And then, so I thought nothing ever came home. But one day, I went to find the hardware people, right? They're hard to find, and I had a God badge, and so I opened the door, and nobody is anywhere in hardware. And I'm walking around, and all of a sudden I could hear them. So I followed the noise. I went up. I found a stairwell that went up to the attic, or not the attic, the roof of the building. And on the roof of the building, they had designed a RF lab, and the purpose for this was. In the olden days, like in my 1976 computer, when I turned it on, nobody could watch TV in the 2 adjacent apartments above me, to the left of me, or underneath me, right? And computers just put out a truckload of interference. And this interference, some of the early, ADA code, they would make a loop, and that loop would make a tone on an AM, it would be static, but it would be a particular frequency. And so clever people figured out that if they put these different loops, they could make songs and things using static. But meanwhile, Atari solved this. The FCC said, if we're going to mass produce computers and video games, you're going to have to do this. And if you open up a 2600, there was it was in a big metal box. And when you open up the Atari, we used to laugh, there was 12 pounds of sheet metal in an Atari 800. And it passed every one of the FCC requirements. And we all thought at Atari, we'd swear on the Bible, that come this date, with the FCC deadline, Apple II would be out of business. TI would be out of business. Everyone would be out of business except Atari, because we were the only ones that had, a perfect,
good shielding, right?
No interference, right? And of course, what happened was the day before, we thought we were all going to be, increased in value by a factor of 10. They all band together. They go to the FCC and cry and whine. No, we can't do it. It's too expensive. It's too hard. It's almost impossible. Well, Atari did it. Yeah, but we can't do it. And they. I remember opening up the first Commodore 64, and its metal shielding was a piece of cardboard with tinfoil glued to it. Oh my God! Right? And they had a metal box around the RF module or something, right? But but that's why the FCC lab. Now, when I found these guys up there, it was sort of like the van in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, when you opened the doors and all the marijuana smoke came out. Or I think they also did that in Back to the Future, the Reefer Madness van. They were having a marijuana party when I interrupted them, and I was up there looking for a particular piece of something, and I know they had them somewhere. And it turns out the room was full of 7-foot office supply cabinets, and they had all the leftovers from the CES shows. So they said, if you need a driving controller, they'd open up 3 cupboards there. Yeah. Do you have a computer at home, Mike? No. Okay, well, you do now. Yeah, you need a couple of disk drives for that, don't you? You need an RS-233, right? So they just go around and it says, and it was like Sergeant Schultz in the TV show. I see nothing. If you see nothing, you have everything. So that went down. That's what happened to that other gear. You talked about Brad Frager. Brad Frager came into it. He was a manager, I think, at a department store. I had it in my mind, but it just vanished. But he was a manager, and he came to them as a manager, and this was after. This was. Yeah, I guess I was trying to figure out if Accolade had moved on yet, and they hadn't. Dave was still there. I was doing Pitfall II on the Atari 800. That's an interesting story in itself. Before I get there, I should probably mention that after I signed up for Activision, the first 3 weeks I worked on a Lunar Lander Atari 2600 game, and I couldn't get it to control like I wanted to. It wasn't fun. And so I abandoned that, and I came up with the concept of turning the story of the 3 little pigs into a game. And I made the cartridge Oink. That was my first 7 months at Activision. Later on, I did a bunch of things because I knew Activision had a technician, but he was not a designer. He could fix, repair, assemble, but he wasn't a designer. And so I had improvements to the development systems. I made the Atari 800 and 5200 development systems. At the Atari auction when they went bankrupt, I was able to buy an HP analyzer, and I was able to buy my wire wrap prototype and a real the real development board, the one that printed circuit board, and I actually found my Atari 800 in my Atari. Think about this, my Atari disk drive, because everybody made the software, but they usually gave it to me to make the masters, and so I had a rule that nobody else could use my machine, and I would write skull and crossbones on it to say this machine is used for production. Keep your hands off of it. And so I was able to buy those in the auction. So I still have those. Anyway, the Atari, the story between the Atari, on Pitfall is Dave Crane had finished Pitfall II. It was originally a 2600 card, but Pitfall 1 taxed the 2600, but Pitfall 2 was beyond the capability of the hardware in the box. And Dave, before he made video games, was actually a chip designer. So he made his own chip to do custom hardware just to make that game. And I think he called it the TPC chip. But he had finished Pitfall 2, and marketing, they knew this was going to be the biggest seller, and so they wanted to come out with translations on the Atari 800, 5200, as well as the Commodore 64, because those were the three systems that were making money that year. And because I had a lot of experience with the Atari 800, there was an era where I could probably write down the entire operating system ROM line by line. It's gone today. All I remember is there's 4 sections today, 40 years later. But at the time, I was very good. So I had made the development system for somebody else, and I used it. And Tim Schotter, one of our other designers, he was given he volunteered to do the Commodore 64 version, and it was a race, and we had 2-3 months to get it done, and the deadline was a CES show in June, so that they could make Christmas by the time it was manufactured. All 3 of them were 6502 based. Tim approach, and Dave Crane tells a story somewhere else on a podcast to some other place. He just looked at the game and wrote code from scratch. And being a heavy computer scientist, it's a 65.0 code. All the code's debugged. All I have to do is change the I/O, right? The input output. So it is a different It was way different, and it's much more complex going from a 2600 kernel to something on the 800. So everybody was amazed. Tim had stuff up on the first few days, and for the first month I have a blank screen and nothing's on there. Right? I'm just reviewing and trying to rewrite. Figure out the design of how to do the graphics on the 800 to emulate the game. But once I had that figured out, my game came together in a heartbeat because all the game logic was there. I used to say that you could take a joystick and you could wire it to the 2600, and you could wire it to the 5200 or the Atari 5200, and all 3 would be frame by frame the same gameplay, the same reflexes, because it was the same code on the same time scale. I was proud of that. But so anyway, so in the end, Tim's got a month of debugging, and it's flawed because I took the code. There are no bugs. Dave Crane did the debugging. So I had time, and I made Pitfall 3. in my mind. There were 256 rooms that you could explore in Pitfall II. Pitfall III had 256 different rooms. There were 5 or 6 antagonists, like an alligator or a bat or whatever in the game. I had half a dozen new ones. They had some new characters. I had some new characters. It was literally Pitfall 3. And I stuck it in the same game. And when it went to management, they went bonkers. They said, I'm thinking I ought to be a hero. And they said, this is terrible. Reminds me of the line out of Mel Brooks' Robin Hood movie, where this is terrible news. Yeah, the same thing. This is terrible news. So the problem was that marketing was embarrassed that the hottest computer out there, the C64, was inferior. It didn't have Pitfall 3 in it. And the other translators, they don't think they could do it either. And so they wanted me to take it out. And I was not impressed with that thought. And so we ended up have to finish this game to its entirety, which is like, 2% of people, right? And there will be no mention of it in the documentation. Just the title will have a mysterious parentheses, the Adventurer's Edition. And with that, they let me keep it in there. And I changed the game for you couldn't access it or get to it directly. You had to solve the first one 100%, and then the second game opened up to you. A little side story. The music for that, I had a snake charming scene where I think you escape by charming the snake and then climbing up the snake to get out of the room. Ed Bogus was a go-to music composer that was like the top notch. So they spent a lot of money. That's the guy you got. And I remember when he came in to do the snake music, he came in with 4 very young females, each with a clipboard. And as he was walking towards me, he was composing 4 different musical scores. And he would turn to the first one and said, D sharp, E, C, B, A, 8th note, and then he turned to the second one and the third one and the fourth one, and by that time he would, I'm Ed Bogus, what are we going to do today? Oh yeah, okay, and then you go back to the first one. Now, while we were entering it in, there was no official musical scale in the Atari 800. You stuck in a hex value from 0 to 255, which, as close as possible, not perfectly, aligned with the notes of the musical scale. It wasn't perfect. So it was taking too long for me to look up the value and plug in and then type the code in, and then to play the music back to him. And so he says, just tell me what the assignments are for all the notes, right? So I tell him, well, it's an F5 does this, and a C7 does this, and a B4 does that, and a 55 does that. And so he started giving me, he's talking and composing 4 different things, right? And he's talking to me and giving me the new song in hex for the values that the hardware needed.
Wow. What's this guy's name?
Ed Bogus. Genius. There were 2 the 2 biggest geniuses I met in that world were Ed Bogus and Dave Crane. Dave Crane. Here's the story for you. I was at Atari for 3 weeks, right? And and Dave is obviously the master of the hardware. And I went to Dave and I asked him a question. And in his near genius, personality, he turned to me and said, Mike, you asked me that same question 3 weeks ago on Tuesday in the late afternoon, 4 or 5 o'clock. I told you the answer. I'm not going to waste my time and tell you again. You should ask any of the other 24, people in our department. And if you still don't get this, you should fire yourself. And of course, this was rather demoralizing to a guy who, just took half salary to work, and whatnot.
Sure.
But I eventually won Dave over because I was the other hardware guy besides him. He could reverse engineer things. He did like the Mattel and television, but I think I gained some respect when I did the others and did some of the hardware things. And eventually, I'm not the smartest guy. I am not the guy with the fastest answer. Au contraire, I'm the guy who has no limits on tedium. Right? I mean, for God's sakes, I grew up on a computer where to put the program in, you'd have to look at the paper tape with a ruler, take the 8 bits off there, translate it into hex in your head, and enter it on your terminal as a hex value. Right? And you do that for the entire 8K chess game because you couldn't afford a paper tape reader. So and all of the Atari graphics. We do. In the 2600 days, we did our own artwork. Starting with the C64 days, we had an artist to do our work. But anyway, doing the cross assemblies, I remember it was taking. I was working at home. I was mad at Atari because they were mad at me. So I stopped shaving. I grew a beard. I worked at home a lot, and it was about 25 minutes between compiles. And so between the compiles, I didn't do what I was supposed to. I was supposed to, work on the next bit of code or something. I would go do a load of wash. I would, scrub the toilet or whatever. And then, eventually I got the idea, I'll bet you I could write an assembler that takes less time. So I wrote a 6502 cross assembler in PDP-11 that ran natively, and in the end I had it match our syntax perfectly, did everything, added a few other features, and it compiled in 7 seconds. My wife thought this was horrible. She never got any more free work out of me. I was all work. Let's see. One of the things I did at Atari on the 800 was I made one of the only right cartridge slot items. It turned out management was approached by a company called Corvus, Corvus, I think. And their claim to fame was they were selling a network board for an Apple II so that you could take 40 Apple IIs and share one 5 megabit hard drive. And they approached Atari because Ataris were 1/4 the price, and more schools could get them if they spent $1,000 on a computer instead of $4,000. And so I came up with a hardware interface and the software, the drivers, and that. And management wasn't happy because you couldn't close the right door and make it a perfect RF sealed box. And I said, Atari is the only one that has RF capability in the first place. It doesn't matter. And I think they made me do it through the 4 joystick ports on the front, but it was a lot slower. So I think the interface board I gave it had both. So, well, if you don't like it, don't use it. But I put it on there. I'm not sure. This was sort of an off to the side job. They didn't want to pay me to do this. They said Corvus will pay you directly, and basically was Corvus at the end of it when I delivered the thing. They gave me the first 10 megabit drive they had. Its cost to them was $12,000, right, for 10 megabits. Think about that. And it was huge. The box it came in was big as our washing machine, and I had it to a decade ago, or maybe 20 years ago, and I passed it on to recycling or somebody who wanted it. The retro world didn't exist quite back then. Apple was very clever. They started giving the Apple IIs away for a song to compete with this, and as a gimmick. And then when the kids grew up, they wanted an Apple, and that worked for them. Let's see. Oh, I'll tell you a story. At Atari, in the parking lot, after Activision is formed, right? And the day the lawsuit ended, I might add, was when what I call the second team of programmers left Atari and formed iMagic. That was Rob Fulop and Bob Smith, Dennis Coble, are just some of the names that popped to mind. A funny story about Bob. I was one of the guys that, maybe the primary guy that helped Bob Smith learn the 2600. And I was heavily concerned for him because his kernel was way different than anything had been seen before, and you know that I was concerned that you know, he wasn't doing what had been done before. It was basically he was making the game video pinball, and he had a bunch of kernels. And the kernels are a horizontal band of code where you're racing the beam, and he would dynamically switch or modify into different versions of that down the screen. And it was a lot to manage in your head, but he pulled it off, and the game was brilliant. So more power to him. It's just a Bob story. Bob, I'll tell you another one. Bob, before he worked for Atari, was into woodworking, and he wood veneered an Atari 800 that looks like it was made out of walnut. So, yeah, that's an interesting Bob story. Another interesting Bob story. Another story in the Atari parking lot. I was approached twice by a person who offered me $5 million opening offer to go back into the building and bring out a 2600 manual. The two companies that they both, I don't know, they both offered me the same amount. And when I said no, they said, "You want more?" And I said, "I'm not interested." I didn't even figure out what their value was. I suspect that some of my coworkers sold out because the next Christmas there were 100 developers doing software. But I might mention that one of those, both of those companies that offered me the $5 million are still giant corporations today.
Mm-hmm.
I'll narrow it down for you. One of them had a 3-letter name or a 3-letter abbreviation for their company, and there used to be one of the 3 companies that made broadcast television. So I don't think they can get me if I don't mention who. But one of them did.
Should you have taken that offer?
Well, no. See, that probably goes against my morals. You know, even a liberator has morals. Sorry.
All right, that's fair.
I you know, in the gray area of pure out theft and liberation, I think I stole one thing and regret it to this day. I stole a bell out of high school. Somebody else had made something with I forget what the project was that required this bell. But you know, I liked the puzzle of not getting caught and how to do it. But I felt guilty about it. But that's the only outright theft. In fact, the game designer at Activision, the game designers, we had all these, you know, parties to go to, and part of the contract of the party was that they don't put wine glasses on designer tables, they put milk. And I had a trouble with sugary soda. I wanted Diet 7-Up, and so many times I couldn't get that, but I tried. Yeah, so yeah, I did not take an Atari 2600 manual with me at any point after leaving. When you brought this up a week ago, I went out and I found it. There is a copy of a Steve Wright manual that's dated the era 1979. At the time, Atari was so paranoid about their manuals. When I was given it, I was told that each manual is unique, so that if I ever copied a page out of it and gave it to somebody, they would know exactly whose it was. I don't know if that carried out the whole 2.5 years I was there, and by the time everybody else got a manual, I don't know if they knew it. I doubt it. But Steve Wright kept his manual, but he published it 10 years ago, but they retypeset it, probably because he knew they could trace it back to him. But, yeah, so they had it retypeset and redone.
Wow.
But anyway, I'm just saying that every manual was unique when I started, or at least I was told that. It was like a 50-page bundle, but it's on the internet now under Steve Wright. So back to that story about, I didn't like the smoker, so I put my desk in the janitor's closet. I put my terminal where you put your feet under the desk because it's on end, and roll the chair out of the lab or the hallway. And the only room they found me, we were so tight, was they put me in with Scott Scheinman. And the room next to him had the only chip guy left. His name was Francis, and he was a cigar smoker, chain cigar smoker. And we thought he had his windows tinted. We thought it was because, Atari didn't want anybody to be able to photograph his drawings or whatever. But it turned out to be it was sludge from the cigar smoke. Oh. So in the Scott, Mike, and I forgot the other one. I'm sorry. Office. We had the door closed most of the time. I have a great story just for people in general about the Craven later. Do you know what a Craven later is?
No. Say it again. Craven later.
The Craven later. What is a Craven later? Okay. So I never had much desire to have a manager. They just seemed to get in the way. They were never technical. At Accolade, they assigned a guy named Mike Craven, not a lot of experience. He was just assigned initially to offload day-to-day tasks where I could focus on it, and then to play test and whatnot. And I didn't have a respect for that role. I had another guy that was even worse. And basically, every day was, "Hi, how are you? What have you done yet today? What did you do yesterday? What are you going to do next? Will that be finished? Can I tell everybody you'll be..." No, go away. Right? It's, designing a game is not exactly linear. I was working on a game called the Psi-5 Trading Company. By the way, I believe that to be the most sophisticated Commodore 64 program ever written.
Okay.
I will take money on it. It's a timeshare system. It has interrupts. It had basically it's a space story, and you're the captain, and you have 5 crew, and you have a bunch of robot repair droids, and then you have like 8 different enemies, up to 8 different enemies of different cultures or planets or whatever their thing is. 8 different groups of aliens attacking you, and they all have a time slayer shot in my thing. And up until this time, most video games processed all their logic in a 60th of a second so that you could be ready to put the graphics on the next thing. I am proudest of my Commodore 64 code. The Psi-5 almost killed me from suicide, of all things, because it was overwhelming at times. I just didn't know if I could get it out for Christmas. I felt really. In the end, obviously Bob and Al finished first, and Al's favorite thing to do in video games was writing the computer player. Mine was the puzzle of getting the best technology to do it. But Al volunteered to write the computer player for the eight different computer players. And basically, I mapped out, you get this many bytes of RAM, and here are all the subroutines you can call to make the screen work. And he was in charge of the box, right, with the enemies in it. And so that was, and then Bob, he went off for 3 days and came back with the whole crew selection stuff. We already had all the artwork. We already had all the text. It was just a matter of presenting it and letting a chooser choose A, B, or C. And so he whipped that, and that was the other side of the floppy. So when he got done, I defined all the rules and things, but and his was really easy. It's like when you get done, the first 6 bytes of 0 page have the index to the crew member for the 6 departments or whatever, or 5 departments. Right? So he just passed me 5 bytes in RAM, and we were off to the races. But again, that being as a timeshare computer, being that it used every all the 64K, and I'm pretty sure that it used the 16K that's underneath the OS. So it was 64K of code present, plus the operating system, plus this, not counting the crew selection, and the game was the game was killed right from the get-go accidentally. We've been playtesting that for a long time, and everybody was good at it. And the beginner level only took us 18 minutes. And Al comes up the night before we're releasing it on the final test and said, "This is too easy. We got to take this out." And so we took out the introductory level, and we made him start on the second advanced level. And it turned out that killed the product. It was too complicated. My nephew coined it as the sequel should be called Psi-4, Uncle Mike. Psi-5's a bit much. The president of Atari, Activision, said, "This is harder than my day job." I remember that. And what I did is I had routines that ran every 60 seconds to do all the graphics, but the long-term logic of the game, right? It was a resource management game. So you do things like my job is just to manage my staff. I would tell the weapons guy, focus on these 2 enemies and use this kind of, one of our 4 different weapons are most effective against them. I tell the repair guy, take 5 droids and tell him to fix this thing. It's the most critical. And then do this and this. Here are the priorities for repair. And then I would tell the navigator, this is where I want to go. It takes some evasive maneuvers, and so forth. There were different departments, and each of these took several frames. So it was a little timeshare computer. I was very proud of it. I filled up the entire 64K of memory. I filled up, 2 sides of the floppy disk, basically. And then, when we formed Accolade, interesting story. Accolade was Al Miller's brainchild, and he approached Bob, and Bob turned him down. And so Al approached me, and so technically I was the number 2 of Accolade in my mind. And then later I talked Bob into it. Of course, Bob and Al had money to put into it, and I was, we were living hand to mouth. And so I didn't put any money into it. And a year later, I found out I was supposed to have 15% of the company, and I had less than 1%. And sadly, I couldn't find the stock certificate for it, so I got nothing out of them at all. But they explained it to me a year later. They went to a meeting and said, "Everybody in this room has stock." And then after the meeting, I went up to Al and said, "Hey, I don't have any stock." Oh, here's 1%. Oh, wait a minute, this is 15%. No, the lawyers said that since you didn't put money in, you can't have any. Too bad. But back to this Craven later. I have this. So Craven was given the job of coming up with futuristic ship parts because, things were constantly breaking and whatnot. And the game logic was critical. It had to be repaired and damaged. What kind of droid had to? There were a lot of rules, and and it was conversational. All these characters had 2 or 3 dozen, lines, and there were like 24 different people. So the selecting of the game was you read the resumes and picked people with different things. So my computer player had 32 different people all doing different things, all different with skills, with 8 different enemies, all with the different things and whatnot. When we started, Bob was going to make a love story. We were going to do movies, right? Mine was a space movie. Al Miller was going to make the Western, and Bob was going to make a love story. And he got into that and decided, nope, I'm going to do a baseball game. Screw it. And it turns out what we all learned is that, the seventh version of baseball is going to outsell anything you come up with from scratch, generally speaking, as a rule. It's just a fact of human nature. But back to Craven. So you're supposed to come up with these names. And so he didn't do it. And the weeks drug on. So to punish him, I started making, I had a table of dozens or hundreds of parts that broke. And I just started putting them in there, Craven, later. And so all the testers were laughing about, this Craven thing is useless, right? It's doing it. We don't know what it's doing. And I said, yes, we're all waiting for Mike. And so eventually we made our own names. Mike didn't do all those, but I left one part. I took the comma out. I changed the E to an O and called it a Cravenlator. So a Cravenlator is defined as, in my mind, is a worthless part that serves no purpose. Nobody actually knew what it did. Most thought it was important. It whined constantly and broke way too easy. It consumed many resources to fix. In the game, you were a fool to worry about it or even spend your resources fixing it. So I think I coined a new word, and you can share it and use it wisely. That's my Cravenlator story.
Very nice. Okay.
So
we've got through Atari, we've got through Activision, did a little bit of Accolade. Let me ask you this. If you could send a message to the people who are still using their Atari computers today, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
Well, one thing I learned about electronics is the more you use them, the happier they are. If you put... I've been selling phone systems since I left the industry, and phone systems that I pack away for 20 or 30 years, perfectly working, and try to pull them out to show something, they don't work anymore. So keep them in use. The capacitors dry out and die, and the more you use it, the happier it'll be. That's one thing, just from a technical side. You have to. You have to remember that the games don't compete with today's products. I mean, we have huge computers and huge graphics chips, and now we have games designed by 1,000 people. So you can't hold them. You can't hold games of the 70s and the 80s to the standards of today. If you have an Atari 800, baby, get yourself a copy of Pitfall II. I think it's a great game.
Fair enough.
I am still haunted by right? Oh God. Right? Yeah, one of the downsides of being a game designer is you hear the same music for 6 months. And you hear everybody else's music because we worked on lab benches side by side or back to back, and then we also had an office for going to write the code and thinking it. I always wrote my code on paper and transfer and then typed it in, and I think many of us did that. There are a few people that just went to a screen to compose, and I don't think that's the best way. I like paper and pencil, erasing it, putting it in, drawing little drawings on the side, making little sheets. You just can't do that on the screen. What else? Atari 800. I know that game is hard to get because we were worried about people, pirates using it and putting it into RAM, and so in the code of the game, I think I had 7 time bombs that I put in the code specifically that if it found itself in RAM, it would set a flag that set a time bomb that 4.5 seconds later it would blow up the computer. There was no way to find it with the analyzer, and it was driving me crazy until I just, oh my God, that's the wrong memory location. I was writing into some obscure piece of hardware and it served no function, no documented purpose. And I used that as one of the bugs. I said, look, if I can't find it in a week with all the tools, these hackers are going to go crazy trying to find it. So yeah, I believe it was probably one of the last games that were pirated and posted. There is a website. A fan has Psi-5 Trading Company as a website that you can play. And it also has all the history and the words in it. I can send you a link if you want.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I still have some computer tapes, but they're on a very rare tape drive. I haven't found it, but I'm working with a company in Texas, and I'm the holdup on that. My memory is such that I can put something away, and then 30 years go back to the spot I put it, and it's usually still there. And I follow the pack rat code that says if you're trying to look for something and you can't find it, it's within 24 inches of where you first thought.
Right.
So I know exactly where I've seen some APX backup boxes, but I can't physically get there at the moment. But I'm going to convince one of my sons who's more agile to do some climbing.
I would appreciate that because, as I said, there are there's a few pieces of software and a few manuals that we're missing, and we would like to get.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So the reason I left the industry, or when I left the industry, is it's somewhere in 1992-ish. Accolade had no clue what was going to be viable that Christmas. The hardware was, they were all waiting. There was nothing new. They didn't know. So they said, you don't take much vacation. Why don't you take a week off? So I took a week off. I came back. They said, take another week off. I came back. They said, take a third week off. And I couldn't be idle. So I actually helped people back in the old days. Right? If you wanted a business phone system, you had to write a letter, and then they would give you a response 2 months later, and then they'd be out there 3 months later with a date. And it was really hard. And at that time, the phone company was being broken up, and you could buy systems. So I always had trouble. We didn't have email, texting, any of that stuff back then. You had to call them on the phone or go and drive there. So and I dealt with a lot of the suppliers to get all the stuff for everything. And so on that week off, I knew where to buy, phone systems. I actually ran the Accolade phone system. I installed and maintained that from 10 people to over 250 as a side gig. So in that 3 weeks, I had made as much money as I did in video games, which was a sizable several $100,000 level in that 3 week period. And it turns out, I said, well, hey, look, I have time off, right? I'm not doing 100-hour weeks anymore. This is great. And I was having fun because, like a game, when you brought a phone system to somebody in that era, it was fun showing it to them. Think of like the first cell phone, have somebody bringing the first Apple with apps to somebody and how excited they were to get it. That was the era of business phones at the time. And so I was still being a hero. It was fun. I decided to leave. I went down and bought a crystal ball, a real one, about 3 or 4 inches diameter. And because Al Miller, the company president, was always talking about, well, I'm going to have to look into my crystal ball and think about that. And and his answer, after he thought about it all, it's still a little bit fuzzy. My crystal ball is fuzzy. So I got him a brand new crystal ball, and then I had I bought a pair of handcuffs, and I spray painted them gold, and I gave those two things as my exit. So that was sort of the end of video games. I did use my logic analyzer to take apart some early video games for my kids to play and have infinite lives as they came out. But pretty much the only two games I play today are, I think it's called Overcooked. It's a resource management about building a hamburger in an assembly line in a kitchen. And the other one is Mario Kart Live, where you use 7-inch physical race cars that have HD cameras on them, and they run around your house. Your house is the racetrack. That's brilliant. Sadly, they thought they got rid of the development team because they thought it would last forever, but Wi-Fi 6 was incompatible with their Wi-Fi 5 cars. And so it became very buggy unless you were smart enough to use an old router with old Wi-Fi. So that's that.
Thank you very much, Mike. Right. This was great.
I think I helped the video game industry, I think I helped make Activision. Because, how could people who had trade secrets go off and compete against them and have to use those trade secrets but be able to do it? But by doing it ahead of time, it gave them. In fact, the Atari hired the most snotty, bestest lawyers in the Valley, Wilson, Cassini, Godrich, and Rosati, or something like that. The lawyer lived in my office next to me for 6 months. I actually taught him how to program the 2600. He was that bright. And he coached me for months on what to say at the deposition. And with that, and anytime I strayed from the line, he would step on my shoe in the deposition. And Al Miller was the spokesperson for Activision, and he knew my whole experience in doing it. And so, well, gee, a kid with, in college with a $300 budget who never done video games professionally could reverse engineer the system. And what makes you think that, people who are in the industry couldn't reverse engineer the system? There were seasoned professionals with years of experience. And the next day, the Atari lawsuit dropped, and the day after that, iMagic was formed, and it actually ended up killing the video game world for a while. I think it was Christmas '83-ish. What we call the year Pac-Man died.
The year so many companies came up with so many different pieces of software of marginal quality sometimes, and
yes,
flooded the market.
And expensive. And so, it turned out, in April after that Christmas, you said, oh, I saw this Activision ad. I really want this game. You go down to the store, Mom would go there, and she would see it for $75, and next to it was a swimming pool full of $3 cartridges. I could buy you 10 of these for half the amount of money. But she would take those 10 home, and they were all crap. And, the kid lost interest. And so I think that's what killed it for many, many years. Sure. I know most of the people that bought big houses or luxury items lost them all. I kept my house, but it was a brutal fight day by day. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Mike.
All right. Well, it was fun to share. Catch you later. Have a great day.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute, make a tax-deductible contribution to the Internet Archive, a nonprofit digital library that has done incredible things to preserve computer history. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate. Thanks.